it's a really tricky thing. I think that was probably the most difficult thing for me in every part of my transition, because transitioning isn't just like, one day you wake up, you find out you're trans, or you've always known, and you decide to start and then you end. It's a process, and it's a lifetime process, especially if you're older and you are used to being seen as a certain person, you are socialized as a certain gender, and it's a huge, it's a huge thing to take on, not just physically, but also like how people perceive you from one end to the other. And I think when it came to the lesbian and gay community, specifically the lesbian community, which I was involved in at the time because I was, identifying as a lesbian and as a woman, it was hard for me. Not when I told people I was trans. When I told people I was trans, everybody was fine with it. Everybody was good, and I lived as a trans person, but without testosterone for about 5 years, and everything seemed fine. I'd had top surgery. That was one process where, some people kind of were like, oh, wait a second, are you sure you want to do that? And I was like, I thought that I told you who I was. So it was one... So that's why, I had to babysit people through that physical change. And then when I decided
babysit other people through your transition.
Oh, yeah. That's what I mean. Like, instead of taking care of myself, that's why I didn't tell anybody when I started testosterone, because all I could think about was all these people looking at me like I was nuts, and me already having, to deal with the possibility of losing my career because I might lose my voice if I took testosterone and all these things. And I was like, you know what? I can't worry about other people right now. So... I think that piece, when I finally went on testosterone, I did have a huge problem, especially with the female community, that I'm still dealing with to this day. And now, because I've come up with a new record, at that point it was suddenly I was not being welcomed into all female spaces, which I understand the need for female spaces, but not places that were necessarily, sectioned off as all female, or places that were inclusive to me before suddenly wanted me out because I was passing as male, and I found that really problematic.
That's interesting. Look, here's a question: and I don't mean to sound ignorant. I hope that you can educate all of us, because there are some things I'm really curious about. Are transgender people transitioning out of the community, no longer homosexual but heterosexual? Is that maybe where some of this disdain comes from, or this non-inclusion comes from, or what is happening?
I'm not sure. I think with every single person, it's a different narrative. So, I can't speak but for other people, but I do know that there are a lot of people that want to stay within the community because they feel it is, their community and their family. And it seems a very natural transition for a lot of people to go into the lesbian and gay community and then not transition out of it, but they try to transition within. I think the problem is that there is a specific mindset with certain lesbian and gays where they believe that they do not want to be affiliated with trans people. And then there are other trans people who do not want to be affiliated with the gay community because of the fact that, gender is gender, it's not sexuality. And I get that piece, I totally get it. But at the same time, I think that we make perfect allies for each other. And because of the fact that we have faced oppression, even if it's from a different, point of view, one is sexuality, one is gender identity. So it's a very muddy kind of like place for some people. I personally love the lesbian and gay community, and I've considered myself a part of it for years, even as a trans person. But now I'm always kind of like, but am I a part of it anymore? I'm not sure, not because I don't want to be a part of it, but because sometimes I feel pushed out of it.
That's interesting. Yes. It's just I was speaking to you, another guest that we were having pillow talk with, and that was one of the things that we discussed was, sometimes transgender persons are transitioning out of, and why do we have such a stigma where we feel like we need to kind of turn our back on them, like they're no longer us. When I think at the end of the day, transgender, gay, lesbian, straight, we're just people. And we,
how about that, huh?
How about we not do, how about we put all these alphabets down for a little while,
Exactly.
The L, G, and the B, and the T.
I mean, the alphabet, I like that.
Can we just, love one another and see each other for our spirit and not, so much for the physicality of a thing? Your story is completely inspirational. What did you learn most about yourself through this process?
You know, I think the one thing that I've really, really learned is that is something that people have been telling me for years. And I always sort of shook my head at it, and I was just like, why is everybody always saying that? Which was that, you know, I had courage. Mm-hmm. And I always told people, you know, I'm no more courageous or brave than anyone else, you know, in the world. And I still believe that. I believe everybody.
I don't know about that, Lucas, but go ahead.
Well, you know, I think it's within us all. I think the only difference for some of us is that we decide that we're going to, you know, take the steps that we have to make ourselves happy. And I think the one thing I learned about myself is that I am not willing in any way in the world to live a lie anymore. Wow. I refuse to be around anything that feels untrue or ungenuine. And this includes people in my life. This includes, you know, being a part of a music industry that feels not genuine. You know, a lot of people are like, well, aren't you looking for a record deal? And I'm like, no, I'm not looking for a record deal because I know what being in a record deal means. And a lot of it means, you know, having to do things that I don't want to do as an artist, you know. So to me, it's just about finding my own truth and being true to myself and finding truth in people around me and, you know, being genuine in that.
Well, what I find most inspirational about you is that you allowed nothing, as you just mentioned, nothing to take away the music, you know, your expression, your voice, your gift. And I think that's inspirational to other people as well. Satin Lounge in 2007, the Toronto Star deemed Lucas as a transgender pop heartthrob. And the title was cemented in 2010 when he was voted sexiest Canadian man in the Chart Attack end of the year survey. How do you feel when you hear accolades like that, Lucas?
Well, you know.
Yeah, you know.
I chuckle a little bit. It's funny. It's cute, you know. And I always tell people, I think the most important part of that, you know, besides it stroking my ego a little bit, which of course it does, you know, why wouldn't it, is the fact that, you know, somebody like myself, meaning a trans person, was deemed that. And when that title came, you know, from voters, not by, you know, a couple of people in a publication that said, let's do this. It was actually, you know, I won with Canadian voters. And I thought that was a very, very inspiring thing, not just for myself, but for a lot of young people who are probably sitting around who are trans, who feel ugly and feel like freaks and feel alone and all of that. And I thought that was a really, really important thing because it's little things like that, especially in popular media. And
little validations, Yeah,
and it makes them feel like, oh, look, there's a representation of myself, you know? And that to me was something that I never had as a kid. I always tell people when I was a kid, the closest I ever got to looking, you know, at a rock band or looking on TV and seeing a representation of myself was, you know, Ziggy Stardust. It was David Bowie, you know, who was androgynous. Or seeing Chrissy Hynde, who was a female who was sort of like, you know, dressed in suits. Or, you know, I remember the first time I saw a Eurythmics video with Annie Lennox wearing a suit and short hair. It blew my mind. I was like, oh my God. And I was so like fascinated by that. But that was truly the closest I ever got to that. So that's what it does for me. For me, it just makes me happy that there's some young kid out there probably going, you know, cool, I'm not a freak, you know? It's very, very simple to me like that,
Well, and at the end of the day, that's the message that's the most important, that you're okay, you know?
Yeah.
We have to take a break, but when we come back, we'll get into the brand new CD by the Cliks with the front man, Lucas Silveira, and their brand new sound, man. You don't want to miss this. I want to play a track right now, actually, from your 2011 release, Mockingbird, if you don't mind.
Absolutely not.
We'll be back with more of the inspirational Lucas Silveira. This is I'm Your Man in the Satin Lounge with Kia Renee. Breathe it in.